Thank you so very much for staying with us on DD India, a special broadcast Biden in White House, where not only we get you the most authentic voices from across the country as well as world, but also DD India's ground presence there in Washington, D.C. And it's our pleasure to introduce Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, former senior diplomat and also Chairman RIS yes, he's there with us. And also we welcome Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General Terry, and Seema Sero is going to be with us in a short while from now. Very eminent senior journalist. She's going to join us from Washington, D.C. And we're going to come to Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, in this, we will have to talk about what it means for India and what Joe Biden really means for the world. But then before that, do you think there's also a bit of a focus on what Biden's speech is going to be all about? Well, the kind of hints that both have dropped so far in the last 1 week or so, it's all about breaking barriers and unifying America. But do you think he's also going to give a sense that he's going to recalibrate all that Trump did in the last 4 years, including many would call Donald Trump's arrogance of showing what America is all about to the world?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think it'll be a bit of all that you have just said. The main theme for me is uniting America. But in order to do that, he will have to reverse some of the decisions made by Trump. So one of them certainly is going to be rejoining the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It's about rejoining the World Health Organization, and it's about engaging with allies. I think that is the main message for the external world, if you like. That is, America is back. We are going to engage with the outside world. It's not America alone. We will work with allies. But I think it's also a demonstration that America will now be committed to multilateralism, because Paris Climate Change Agreement, WHO, those are all ultimately symbols of multilateralism. And those are issues which I think Biden knows more than anybody else, that it cannot be resolved by the United States alone. Whether it is climate change, whether it is nuclear proliferation, whether it is public health crisis like the coronavirus, the COVID we've had, all this demands international cooperation, which I dare say has suffered heavily under President Trump. So that will, I think, undergo a sea change. That's at least the expectation.
Dr. Mathur, the U.S. getting back into the Paris Climate Accord, what does this actually mean for the whole movement, for getting the world back in terms of climate consciousness and the importance that it has for the future of the world?
Well, first of all, there's a huge sigh of relief. And I think the world has been looking forward to the day when the second largest emitter in the world came back. It's a great moment. It's also a moment which has got all kinds of repercussions attached to it. As the US comes in, it also brings with it a whole history of debate within the US on the conditions under which the US participates or does not. You will remember the sense of the Senate vote when, and this is way back at the time of the Kyoto Accord, when the US Senate, by a vote of 97-1, suggested that the US should not join an agreement where India and China, and so named, did not take on obligations. This continues till today, and therefore, in a divided US, the challenge of how President Biden would deliver on his promises and how he would engage with the world becomes, in a sense, a kind of a drama in which he's playing to his internal audience, but he cannot let his external audience go either. It will be very interesting to see how this evolves.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, Dr. Mathur and Ambassador Kumar, we request you to stay with us because we also need to dip in and take a look at what is this team Biden, the composition going to be all about. It's a historic cabinet that looks like America. That's how Biden puts it, the composition of his cabinet. So who has been chosen by Biden for national security, for economic policy, for additional cabinet positions and a range of other positions, including his top White House advisors? Mark?
Well, indeed, speculations are rife. In fact, Biden will overhaul departments to remove President Trump's appointees and nominate officials to carry out his policy agenda. But these officials require the Senate confirmation. And as per reports, at least 25 Indian Americans are set to hold key roles in the new administration, with at least 15 in key policy positions.
The Biden-Harris cabinet, it will be historic. The cabinet that looks like America, that taps into the best of America, that opens doors and includes the full range of talents we have in this nation. And like the rest of the team, today's nominees are ready on day one, which is essential because we literally have no time to waste.
Right, and why don't we just, Mark, take a moment or two or talk about the diversity of Biden's cabinet and the Indian Americans that you mentioned. Yeah. They have been nominated to be part of his government. Abhishek Mahajan, our colleague, has worked on this very detailed explainer, is going to tell us more about the tone, the tenor and the composition of Team Joe Biden, including those 20 plus Indian Americans out there. Abhishek, good evening, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Sakal. So Joe Biden has named or nominated at least 20 Indian Americans to key positions in his administration, which is a new record in itself. And first on the list, topping the list, is Neera Tandon, who has been nominated as the Director, Office of Management and Budget. And next on the list is Dr. Vivek Murthy, who has been nominated as US Surgeon General, very important and key position. And third on the list is Vanita Gupta, who has been nominated as Associate Attorney General, Department of Justice, very, very key position this is. And on Saturday, Biden nominated a former Foreign Service official, Azra Zaya, as the Under Secretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy and the Human Rights. And next on the list, we'll quickly run through this. We have a long list here, 20 in total. Mala Diga, Policy Director to the future First Lady, who is Dr. Jill Biden. And next on the list is Garima Verma. She has been nominated as Digital Director of the Office of the First Lady, again Dr. Jill Biden. And next on the list is Sabrina Singh, who has been chosen as Deputy Press Secretary. And for the first time ever, among the Indian Americans include two who trace their roots to Kashmir. And first on the list is Aisha Shah, who has been chosen as Partnership Manager, Office of Digital Strategy, very key position this is. And the second number is Samira Fazili, who has been nominated as the Deputy Director at the US National Economic Council, NEC. And White House National Economic Council has another Indian American, Bharat Ramamurthy. He has been nominated as the Deputy Director. If we go further, Gautam Raghavan, who served at the White House in the previous Obama administration, returns to the White House as Deputy Director in Office of Presidential Personnel. And among Biden's inner circle is his top confidant for a year, Vinay Reddy, who has been named as Director of Speech Writing. And if you go further, young Vedant Patel, he is all set to occupy a seat in the White House lower press behind the briefing room as Assistant Press Secretary to the President. And he is only the third ever Indian American to be part of the White House press shop. If we go further, 3 Indian Americans have made their way to the crucial National Security Council of the White House, thus leaving a permanent imprint on the country's foreign policy and national security. And they are, first on the list is Tarun Chhabra, who has been nominated as Senior Director for Technology and National Security. Sumona Guha is second on the list, Senior Director for South Asia. And next on the list is Shanti Kalathil, who has been nominated as the Coordinator for democracy and human rights. Sonia Agarwal, she has been chosen as Senior Advisor for Climate Policy and Innovation, Office of Domestic Climate Policy. And next on the list is Vidur Sharma. He has been chosen as Policy Advisor for Testing for the White House COVID-19 Response Team. And last but not the least, 2 Indian Americans women have been appointed to the Office of the White House Counsel. They are Neha Gupta as Associate Counsel, and second on the list is Reema Shah as Deputy Associate Counsel. So during the campaign, Biden had indicated that he would rope in a large number of Indian Americans, and the list shows that he trusts this diaspora. But all of these officials must be confirmed by the Senate.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Sakal and Ramesh.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks very much, Abhishek. And our correspondent Nick Harper is joining us once again. So let's go across to Nick. There seems to be a lot of diversity, a broad spectrum in a sense of people from all sorts of backgrounds. It represents a more plural America, one would think, and that's probably what the Democrats stand for. Nick, is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what Joe Biden was pushing throughout his campaign, that idea of inclusivity, saying that that was something that we haven't seen during the 4 years of Donald Trump, not just from his policies and his proposals, from things like hardline immigration policies, but also his cabinet picks. So that's why Joe Biden is trying to very much promote diversity and promote it in the Indian American community. I think it's interesting to note his nominee Neera Tanden, nominated for the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget that we heard about just a moment ago. She is likely to face the toughest challenge when it comes to her confirmation hearing. She has been the president of a non-profit organization, the Center for American Progress, a liberal progressive organization that the Republicans are very much against. So the thinking is that she, out of all of those picks, will have a tough time when it comes to that Senate confirmation.
And what about the others? Would it be reasonably easy for all of them to be confirmed, given the fact that the Democrats hold a majority in both houses? They will be holding a majority in the Senate as well.
Indeed, and the other names on the list are certainly less controversial in nature. The thinking is that Ms. Tanden, though, because she has stood for those liberal and progressive, very much left-wing ideas, those simply won't be palatable to conservative Republicans, even more moderate Republicans. But yes, it will be easier for the Democrats with the majority in the Senate. And therefore, the hope is that those other nominees that he has put forward, even though they will find that they will have a tough time, the Republicans won't let them off lightly when it comes to questioning them in those committee hearings. The thinking is that they will at least be able to pass when it comes to the actual vote.
And how soon will it be for the team to be put in place? I mean, when they all get confirmed, how long does it normally take for a new president who takes office to have his team in place?
Well, it's always a very fluid situation. It's something that for some of the top pick, the cabinet picks, he hopes to have confirmed within the space of just the first few weeks in office. He very much wants to get that top team together as quickly as possible, and that's why we're already seeing those committee hearings taking place today for 5 of those cabinet picks, including Secretary of State, moving forward as quickly as possible. And that's also why their thinking is that we will not see the impeachment trial of Donald Trump taking place immediately. Instead, the Democrats prioritizing getting those cabinet nominees confirmed by the Senate, rather than being bogged down with the legal proceedings of that impeachment of Donald Trump.
All right, Nick, requesting you to stay with us, joining us live from Washington, D.C., from just outside almost Capitol Hill. Nick, such a pleasure to talk to you live on this broadcast. Let me also quickly take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Seema Sirohi, also joining us live from Washington, ma'am. Good evening and good morning to you, in fact. And also Dr. Mathur as well as Ambassador Kumar continue to stay with us. Ms. Sirohi, well, this one is for you, looking at the composition, especially talking about the Indian American. This is something which has also grabbed a lot of international headlines. Do you think this is going to be a sort of advantage India in terms of now us engaging with the new Biden administration, also further consolidating Indian diaspora there amidst Biden administration?
The first thing to remember is that they're Americans first, and Indian Americans second. So I think we should not lose sight of that fact. They will be implementing policies that the administration wants. As far as India's advantage is concerned, there are some in the National Security Council who are Indian Americans who have a strong view on China. And that's a positive for sure. For example, the Senior Director for Technology, Arun Chabra, he sort of tracks Chinese activities in different countries, the tentacles that China sort of puts out in various open societies. So indirectly, it will work to India's advantage because there is really no one who is India unfriendly, if you know what I mean. So, but we must remember that the overall policies of the administration will be the things to watch out for.
All right.
Indeed. Mr. Mathur, how would you look at, the choice for Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm is her name, and also the fact that there is such a strong focus on trying to build renewable energies now into the mix for America, which has, recently found shale gas and trying to rebuild their economy around that. How would you look at this kind of change? Is there a change actually? Would it be possible economically?
Well, economically and politically, the change is very clear. Mr. Biden, even in his Democratic Presidential Manifesto, had talked about moving towards a clean energy future. With the dropping prices of renewable energy, it is fairly clear that any other option, fossil fuel option, would be more expensive. He has also said that by 2050, the US would move towards a zero carbon emission future. All of this together implies that there is a very strong move towards putting renewables as the basis for all future growth in the American energy sector. This is big. Now, obviously, states like Texas had invested a huge amount in wind, but what we are seeing is a wholesale shift away from gas, and you mentioned the fracking of shale gas as a major source. So we are seeing a policy shift in the way the US looks at energy.
The global observers watched Capitol riot siege with utmost horror, Ambassador Kumar. Is it fair to really compare the two? Do you think there will be comparisons post-Biden officially talks about his blueprint here on, considering it's not your oratory skills which actually determine how effective you are in terms of governance? What happened during these elections and the contrasting styles of reaching out to the people of America will also have its impact on the people's psyche once Biden addresses the nation?
No, I think you have a point. I mean, it's one thing to campaign and win elections, but
Absolutely.
it's another thing to govern. What you can say in favor of Joe Biden is that he has spent a lifetime in public service. He knows the wheels of the American government and how they move. He's got excellent connections. But I think my sense is he will be greatly focused on the COVID and the economy to begin with. Everything else will take a bit of a backseat. And one of the things that he has said is that he is not going to rush into trade deals. And the reason he has said that is because the domestic economy and the domestic COVID situation is going to suck so much of energy from this administration that the first 100 days are going to be really dominated by these two. He might have a summit for climate change, a summit for democracy. Those things will happen on the sidelines. But I strongly suspect rebuilding, or I think the current phrase which is very popular now is building back for America. Building back, I think, is going to be the theme of Biden. He's going to focus so much on COVID, domestic economy, that, and now that he has got a slender margin in the Senate, confirmations will not be a problem. That is one thing that I'd like to add. I thought that would take a lot of political capital, but I think with the slender majority in the Senate, a lot of these nominations, which I must say he has made in a very, very timely fashion. I remember that the USTR appointment to the American system normally takes 6 months, but we already know the name of the USTR, the trade representative. So I think he's done a wonderful job of nominating people. I think they will get confirmed in the Senate fairly quickly. So governance will begin. But
Yes.
I still think the economic situation in the United States, which means, the stimulus package, the $2,000 check payment, then
Yes.
the COVID situation, the vaccine, those will, I think, take a lot of his time, at least in the first 100 days.
Yes,
Indeed.
sir.
Well, the hopes of millions of Americans demanding climate action now rest with President-elect Joe Biden. And after 4 years of Donald Trump's rampant regulatory rollbacks, the list of priorities is a long one, isn't it, Sakal?
Absolutely. And Joe Biden is expected to put in place a very robust kind of a climate crisis army, as he believes in this team, which has Indian Americans in it as well. Remember, and together he says, we'll show the world that America is once again ready to take a leading role in the fight against climate change. Now, the new president's executive orders, there's a lot of focus on that also, Mark, on day
indeed.
one, are expected to include these instructions to rejoin the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. We're going to get a comment from Dr. Mathur on that as well. Very important, amongst others. But before that, let's quickly once again go across to our colleague Munmun, who's once again prepared a very detailed explainer on the climate change blueprint and what does it really break into or boil down into. Munmun, over to you.
Well, thanks, Sakal and Mark. So Biden is preparing to deal with climate change in a way no U.S. president has done before, by mobilizing his entire administration to take on the challenge from every angle in a strategic, integrated way. This is the climate policy of Joe Biden. He has promised to rejoin the Paris Agreement immediately upon taking office. The reference to executive order that you were making, Sakal, earlier. On the 4th of November, the U.S. formally withdrew from the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change, a decision originally announced 3 years ago, and cancelled the Keystone XL oil permit, that's the pipeline permit. So Biden's inauguration day is set to mark a sea change in U.S. climate policy. What's more, Biden has pledged to make the U.S. climate neutral by 2050 or earlier, something environmental economists have described as a huge step. In fact, climate neutrality refers to net zero emissions of all greenhouse gas emissions, and that is why that target becomes extremely significant and headline making. Also, plans to make the U.S. power sector climate neutral by 2035. This is something where there could be visible results within the 3 to 4 years following from now. Also, one target is 100% clean energy economy. For information of the viewers, the U.S. is the second leading producer of all carbon dioxide emissions globally, second largest CO2 emitter, that is, just behind China. So at the end, we'll say that Biden has chosen his climate crisis army too, and so strong the list this is that this has been largely welcomed by climate scientists and activists. Back to you, Sakal and Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Munmun. So, Dr. Mathur, it's a clear shift, as you were saying, in terms of policy as far as climate is concerned. But economically, how feasible is it and how many jobs will it create? This is the way it has to be seen by the American people for it to work, isn't it? That they have to find themselves involved with it, and economically they can get gains from it.
I would like to stress what Ambassador Mohan Kumar said. President Biden is the president. He has a majority in the House, in the Senate, and obviously he's the president. But these are razor-thin majorities. We also have a vote which was a vote bank that is split along the middle. I think Mr. Biden is going to spend a lot of time in bringing people together. The COVID agenda provides a way of bringing people together and not ripping them apart.
Okay.
Consequently, he will plan to do the work on energy and climate in the relative background of bringing people together under the COVID ban. Now, as far as the economics is concerned, this is as much a concern for the US as it is for India. They have the same opportunities, declining prices of renewables as we do. We have shown the world how to use these to our advantage. Today, solar electricity in India costs less than electricity from any other form. At 1.99 rupees a kilowatt hour, solar is much, much cheaper. However, it's only available when the sun is shining. And therefore, our challenge and the US's challenge is how do you make it the cheapest source all 24 hours when the sun is not shining? And hence, for the US and for India, the challenge is batteries.
Okay.
Also looking at areas where electricity cannot be, renewable electricity cannot be the source. So we are looking at hydrogen, the US and India together. This makes an opportunity for the US to answer the critics within the country on how they're collaborating with India, and for India to gain from the kinds of technological cooperation that will help both the US and India to develop and implement a large amount of battery and hydrogen infrastructure. So there are opportunities for moving ahead for both India and the US together.
Okay. Okay, and let's talk a little bit more in detail about these opportunities. Ambassador Kumar, you've been India's envoy to France, to Bahrain, and now the US perspective. In fact, this question, I'm going to take it to Ms. Sirohi also, but first to you, Ambassador Kumar. This consolidation of Indian diaspora that I talked about, a bit on that, plus looking at the blueprint, you're talking about the economic stimulus, very ambitious climate change plan. You think these are very, very bold decisions taken by the Biden administration because he had to make some noise. He has inherited a lot which needs to be done, and but the implementation of it is something which is very different, and he has this 100 days timeline. He has to do a lot. His hands are full. There is a plan in place, but it is very ambitious and extremely bold.
Yes, thank you. Let me begin with the diaspora angle that you mentioned. I think it is a broad reflection of the power of the Indian diaspora that so many of these Indian Americans have joined the government. So that is as it should be. But I broadly agree with Ms. Seema Sirohi. It is not proper to therefore draw the inference that these people will necessarily influence matters for India. That is something that India will have to do. I think communication will be easier, and they may have a better appreciation, for example, of the farmer protests. They may have a better appreciation of it than, let us say, Americans, because they have a sense of what is going on in India. But beyond that, I think it is the Indian government's task, the Indian embassy, and for the Indians really to convince the Americans of their perspective. On the challenges presented to Joe Biden, I think I agree with you. The rhetoric might outstrip the reality, but it is important to bear in mind that it is far easier for Joe Biden to do something in foreign policy than domestic policy.
Okay, that's a very interesting point.
Yes. Domestic policy is where he needs bipartisan consensus. He has to work with Republicans and so on. Foreign policy, for a long time, for example, I want to pick up a point that Dr. Mathur made very well. In Kyoto Protocol time, the Senate had a say in America's participation in Kyoto Protocol. But it's very interesting to note that for the climate change agreement, the Senate ratification was never sought because President Obama felt that this was a self-executing agreement. Under the American Constitution, you go to the Senate only if it is a treaty. If it is an agreement, you don't go to the Senate. Okay. And Obama happily said, the climate change agreement is an agreement, it is not a treaty, so I'm not going to the Senate. So Biden will have no problem rejoining the Paris climate change agreement. He will have a spate of regulations tomorrow. One of the things he's going to do is cancel the Keystone project that links oil from Alberta in Canada to United States.
Is that going to, yes, let me quickly get in Seema Sirohi here. Seema Sirohi, first of all, do you agree with Ambassador Kumar that for Biden, it's going to be relatively easier to trudge global waters than to actually deal with his opposition back home? A. B. How is he really going to do this? There's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of messaging associated with it, but then tomorrow is going to be back to business and he has to do it.
Right. I agree with Ambassador Kumar that on the foreign policy front, he has more space to do things. One option is, rejoining or restarting negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal, which his people have indicated they want to do. Then the question of the Trump administration's China policies. While they have said that their style would be different, they haven't said that they disagree with the way the Trump administration proceeded with China, imposing sanctions and sort of calling them on the mat for their treatment of minorities, etc. So yes, he could continue on with some of those Trump policies. On the domestic front, I agree with the ambassador, it's going to be much tougher. Already on the southern border, there are signs of trouble. Thousands of people are trying to reach the Mexican border with the United States because they feel that President Biden is going to be more lenient on immigration policies. So that's going to loom into a major crisis, I think. There is no indication how they're going to deal with it. The people at the border police are very concerned, but the administration, the Biden team has said they're going to send legislation to the US Congress on reforming immigration policies, grant citizenship to the children who have grown, who came illegally with their parents, who came illegally as well. But they've grown up in America and they talk like Americans, they think like Americans, and they need to be granted citizenship.
Yes.
All those issues will be very heavily debated. The Republicans will push back against a very lenient immigration policy. So we will just have to see. All of Biden's negotiating skills and old relationships in the Senate will have to be, will be tested.
Yes. And very quickly, this was Ms. Sirohi for you only because you interact with diaspora there, the political class there, and masses in general, being journalists of such an eminence, joining us live from Washington, D.C. This Biden's worldview vis-a-vis Donald Trump's worldview, they're two opposite things. But then, do you think there's going to be an easy acceptance for Biden's engagement with the world? Why I'm asking you this? Because Trump, what the Trump that world saw in the last few months is not what really world expected Trump to be after that dismal loss.
Right. So it would be tough for Biden to bring back America, at the top of the leadership table. The Europeans already are very skeptical and they're hedging their bets. As you saw, they have agreed in principle with China on an investment agreement, despite the incoming administration's request to wait and consult with them. So yes. I think overall for America to be back as as the leader of the quote unquote free world, they'll have to work hard at it. Many countries are leaning towards, the other superpower in the making. And it would be a tough call for Biden. And saying that America is back is not going to be enough. They'll have to do a lot more hard work
Yes.
Then the other thing to remember is that the senior officials in the Biden administration have talked about foreign policy working for the middle class of America.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, it's kind of another softer version of America First.
Okay.
And they do recognize that 74 million people voted for Donald Trump in this election. And they are very disgruntled. Many of them believe the election was stolen, etc., etc.
Yes,
so
Mr. Roy.
these people, many of them have lost their jobs. They are against globalization, and how to bring them back and
yes.
make the economy work for them again is going to be a very tough
Well, there's
task.
lot that Joe Biden has inherited from Donald Trump. Let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General Terry, for joining us and putting all this in a larger perspective. Mark, and what's up next now?
Well, the U.S. National Mall has been lit up. This is with a display of thousands of U.S. flags, because these are meant to represent the Americans who will be unable to attend the inauguration because of all the restrictions, the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. And while presidential inaugurations in the U.S. are always tightly secure events, this time the security is being beefed up even more in the nation because it's still rattled by the January 6th Capitol attack and also the potential armed protests on Inauguration Day.
Absolutely, Mark. And the U.S. Department of Defense and the FBI are leaving nothing to chance. We know that there are around 25,000 strong National Guard troops keeping a very, very close visual over the U.S. Capitol. Nick is still with us live from the very spot. We'll go to him in a bit later. But these troops have been coming in from across the United States of America to actually prevent any recurrence of a January 6th-like event. Take a look at this detailed report first.
National Guard troops numbering in thousands are on standby to reinforce security at President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration on Wednesday. They've been positioned throughout Washington, D.C., even as metal fences and barriers have been erected around the White House and the Capitol building. But the security blanket is even thicker, as the U.S. Department of Defense is urging FBI background checks be done on 25,000 National Guard soldiers in the city.
If you don't have the inauguration pass, and you can't come in. Only the people who put the paperwork to get the inauguration passes can come in.
The streets of the U.S. Capitol have been eerily empty. It certainly looks like the security presence has dissuaded most protesters from returning to the city to attempt a repeat of the January 6th siege of the U.S. Capitol.
It's definitely very weird, but this city has never had so much military and so many police force around, and I mean, we understand why. It's just like, it just feels very weird, and yeah, it's almost a bit dystopian.
Such is the level of security alert that the U.S. Capitol complex was shut down for about an hour on Monday after a small fire broke out nearby. Certainly, nothing is being left to chance before the Biden inauguration. Bureau Report, DD India. So Nick Harper joins us once again. Nick, it's going to be a very different inauguration this time round. No crowds, but specifically no outgoing president either, and that's it sets a tone in a sense for what one is to expect. It's one doesn't know whether it's a celebration or a somber event.
Yes.
That's right. I mean, normally this type of event would be a celebration, and I think that's still what Joe Biden is aiming for, at least to a lesser degree. We won't see the thousands of people that we would normally see out on the National Mall, waving flags, cheering, celebrating. That wasn't going to happen because of COVID-19, but it's been scaled back even further because of security concerns. But yes, certainly a snub that the outgoing president, Donald Trump, won't be there, just becoming the fourth president in US history, the first for 150 years not to attend his successor's swearing-in ceremony. Donald Trump instead jumping on a plane on Air Force One an hour before Joe Biden's inauguration and heading off to Florida. So yes, it will be a more somber mood just because there will be less people out on the streets of Washington, D.C. during the course of tomorrow's celebrations. But Joe Biden is very much still trying to add that celebratory atmosphere by holding a big virtual parade rather than an in-person parade, going to different states around the US to see performances, musical performances, but also performances from the general public, from military organizations right across the US to show that there is still that sense of nationwide celebrations, even though they're not happening specifically here in the nation's capital.
But isn't it maybe muted, but really celebrations for the Biden camp, considering one of the most vitriolic elections that United States of America has seen in recent times, and what really transpired on ground post-elections, plus the Capitol siege? Nick, it is somber, it is low-key, but what's the view when it comes to the Biden camp? Well, Biden has managed to trounce Donald Trump in these elections. At the end of the day, it's Joe Biden.
Well, absolutely, and he won very convincingly in that election. Even though 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, there were millions more who voted for Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden wants to mark that fact, to draw a line very much under what we've seen since the November 3rd election, those continued allegations from the Trump camp that the election was stolen by the Democrats. Joe Biden, in his victory speech, said that it was a moment to turn the page, to essentially put the past behind Americans and move on. And I think that is a message that he will want to put forward in his inaugural address tomorrow, that yes, things have happened and people didn't agree necessarily with the result, but now is time, as a nation, for America to unite behind this new president.
But Nick, the Republicans have been in the minority for quite some time, ever since since Bill Clinton's election. I think even Al Gore had more votes than George W. Bush, even though George W. Bush did have more votes in the next election. But ever since then, the Republicans have always been in a minority, and that's the trend. It looks like the Republicans will always remain in a minority. So how do you see this playing out going into the future? Because the country is deeply divided. Some were looking at the methods that Donald Trump used were a process of rallying the Republican Party into action. It was sleeping to some extent, and now it's sort of energized.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that, of course, 4 years ago, like you mentioned, again, the Republicans were in the minority. Donald Trump losing the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by about 3 million votes. But he won the election overall because of the way the electoral college votes are counted across the US. I think there are very big questions now as to what happens to the Republican Party going forward. There hasn't been a wholesale relegation of Trumpism. The Republican Party grandees, to some extent, are still embracing the ideals of Donald Trump. We're still seeing people like Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, very much seeming to be trying to get the support of that Trump base, being able to perhaps rely on that for if he runs for election as the president in 4 years' time in 2024. So not everyone has decided to relegate Donald Trump to history, and I think it will be up to the Republican Party over the coming months to decide how they want to move forward, whether they will return to some of their more conservative ideals of the past, or whether they will hold with some of those more radical elements that Donald Trump has brought to the party during the past 4 or 5 years.
Thanks very much, Nick Harper, for joining us. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, if we had to look at recent presidents of the United States, from the Democrats' side, they've been relatively young people. Bill Clinton was in his 40s, so was Barack Obama, and now we have President Biden, who's going to be 78 years old. So, I mean, from the Democrats' standpoint, they've usually had pretty young presidents in the recent past. Even their previous president before that, Jimmy Carter, was in his 50s when he became president. So it looks like this is, something quite different for the Democrats.
Yes, I think it was a peculiar election in that sense because all the Democratic candidates, even if Joe Biden hypothetically was not the candidate, you had to fall back on Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and all of them were relatively old. So in that sense, what you say is right. For India, I think it could turn out to be an advantage because he's been in public life for so long. We have three advantages. One, he knows India very well, Joe Biden. And we know a lot of his nominees because External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar was ambassador there at the time of Obama. He knows a lot of people. A lot of these people have actually worked in the Obama administration. Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, I mean, you name it. A lot of these people know India very well. And finally, it also seems to me that when it comes to relationship with India, there is a bipartisan consensus in the United States. So, I mean, if you can work with Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, I mean, these people are so different from one another. I don't see a problem for India working with this administration. So I see positive aspects there. But what you say about age is right. Probably also goes to show that age is just a number. If you are in good health and, if people think you are suitable. For example, Bernie Sanders got a lot of votes from very young people. So it's not as if the young people didn't prefer people who were relatively old. So even Joe Biden got a lot of votes from very, very young people. So I'm beginning to think that age is now becoming gradually irrelevant, especially when it comes to politics in the United States.
Okay. Mr. Rohi, immediately after Joe Biden is sworn in, amidst unprecedented security in Washington, he's also expected to take series of executive orders. And, the focus will now shift from semantics and rhetoric and optics and messaging to real business. Help us understand, run us through what happens tomorrow post this so-called low-key inauguration ceremony, which the world media and the world would be closely watching, including us in India.
Right. I mean, it is one of the most unusual transfers of power in American history. It has to be, admitted that 25,000 National Guardsmen and women are currently deployed in Washington, D.C. That is highly unusual. It is a celebration of democracy without citizens. There's going to be no crowds, no revelry, and that usual walk that they take after taking the oath to the White House, that I believe is going to be curtailed and maybe not happen at all. So, but what Biden's people have indicated is that they are going to start working from the moment, that is noon at the time at which the President-elect Biden becomes President Biden. And there's a flurry of executive orders and things that the lifting of the ban against majority Muslim countries, that's one of the things that people have demanded that Biden do as one of his first presidential acts. That'll happen on climate change. So it will be like what I would call a Biden blitz. A lot of orders, executive orders and legislation. But I think the one thing that I worry about is the impending impeachment, how it will take up the Senate's time. And there's some concern in Team Biden that they want their nominees to be confirmed as soon as possible so they can start working, they can access classified material, etc., etc. if the Senate gets bogged down in holding a trial of Donald Trump, that'll suffer. The nomination process will suffer. So there's some people have floated the idea that half of the day, that is early morning to about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Senate work on the nomination process. And the afternoon and evening be devoted to the trial procedure.
Yes.
It's not clear when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will send the article of impeachment. As you know, it's just a single article, which is incitement to insurrection. And so far as I know, investigations are going on of several people, about 100 people who participated in this insurrection are being investigated, as long as, they have to present evidence if they're going to convict. So the House,
speaking about that insurrection itself, Ms. Sirohi, there were concerns that from the Department of Defense that some of the security guard, the National Guard, some of them could actually be, deep-rooted Trump supporters, and they wanted cross-checks being done on them. Are these reports true? We just read them in the media here. But if they are true, then how deep is the concern that the Biden administration faces, or are they too fearful? Really, are they going too far?
No, they're not going too far. There are concerns. The concerns are real because in the insurrection, at least 4 people were identified who were either former Army or naval veterans. And now they've identified some retired police officers who participated. So the concern is very real. But the way the officials have explained it is that they routinely do these background checks when at the time of inauguration, because they have to make just absolutely sure that there is no chance of an insider attack. The FBI has caught some chatter on the dark web about all this. So the concerns are very real. No, these are not just media reports. Officials have been on record over the last 2 days on various television channels here talking about them.
Okay, Ambassador Kumar, so now we're also looking at some reverses when it comes to reversing some of the Trump's restrictions by Biden. Some of it we've already talked about. We got a sense of it when Donald Trump wanted to lift the travel ban, and what we saw coming from the Biden administration, also extending pandemic-related limits on evictions and on student debt payment, making it mandatory for wearing masks, most importantly. What is the sense that you are getting from general Americans? We might discuss a lot when it comes to domestic politics, global politics, all that, and this can go endless, but America suffered. America suffered immensely during pandemic times. Everything boils down to that first, would you say?
I agree, but it's hard to reconcile what you and I agree on, which is America suffered during pandemic, with the fact that 74 million people still voted for Trump. We thought that Trump was a poor manager of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, forget everything else. Just the management of the COVID should have ensured that he lost badly, but that has not happened. So that leads me to believe, Sakal, that there is a problem in the country in terms of identifying what the...
Ambassador Kumar, very interesting, very briefly. Trump suffered, America suffered because of the Trump and the way he dealt with pandemic. And do you think that was a rallying point why Trump was handed this snub, hence the defeat? It was pandemic actually?
Well, some of it was pandemic, definitely, because the view I'm getting from many of the American friends is, Ms. Sirohi will be the right person to answer this, but for the pandemic, if he had managed that well, you might have actually seen him getting re-elected. The pandemic was managed so badly. The number of deaths in the United States, the number of people getting infected in the United States was colossal. So that you couldn't hide, frankly. And I do believe pandemic was a primary reason for Donald Trump failing to get re-elected. That's certainly my view.
Yes.
Right,
Mark.
Ms. Seema Sirohi, well, the President Biden has said that he's going to work for healing the soul of America, but we know that he practices his faith. That's important he is probably one of the first presidents of the United States to publicly practice his faith, and most of the people who follow his faith, the Roman Catholic faith, are actually Republican voters. So how do you see, this work out? That much of the division in America is largely on religious lines, and the conservatives are deeply religious people. That's the way that's the way analysts look at it. Would you see that working towards healing this divide?
See,
The fact that he publicly practices his faith.
President-elect Biden has talked a lot about healing, and it is true that is his major message ever since the campaign, because he said that I want to fight for the soul of America. But on the other hand, there is no question that there are deep divisions, not just on religious grounds, economic grounds, all kinds of grounds. It is like there are two Americas, and they don't talk to each other. So while some people in the mainstream media here are discussing the healing process, people in the conservative media are talking about how Biden is not going to heal, but he's going to divide further, because he's going to, the Senate is going to go ahead with the impeachment. So these are the issues. They are also talking about taking Trump away from all the social media platforms, and that they are denying free expression to the conservatives. So these are some real issues. The whole question of taking him off Twitter has sparked a very big debate about the power of the tech companies over here.
Yes.
Biden will have to deal with that, because for 4 years, these tech companies did nothing when Trump was using them.
Yes.
His message has been divisive all along. So the actual insurrection was the final act that prompted them to action. And again, it's very random. They take off Trump, but they don't take off many other people in many other countries who exploit these platforms.
Yes, indeed. I think we could go on discussing this issue, because ultimately that is the soul of America that we are discussing. So we'd have to figure that out and then find out how the soul of America can be healed. Thanks very much, Seema Sirohi and Ambassador Mohan Kumar, for joining us. And as we go, we bring you the voices from the Indian diaspora in the United States. Let's listen to their message for Team Biden.
I'm truly excited for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to take on their administration this week. I believe in the history of America, this is probably going to be the most inclusive administration.
Indo-US relations are going to be on an extreme level, on high skyrocket, strongest relation ever in the history of United States. As Biden have lent already the hand to Prime Minister Modi that he will work very closely with India.
The countries will come around together and work for the things that are of common interest and the threat of China, and for the prosperity of all people of both countries.
As an Indian American and immigrant, I could not be more proud of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's historic victory. She represents the American dream, paving the way for immigrants, Black and brown girls.
We look forward to this great day in American democracy during very dark and uncertain times, but I'm confident that the hand of the wheel that is guiding the great flight of America will be in steady hands with the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Well, that's it from our entire team of Biden in White House. But don't forget to join us tomorrow at sharp 8 p.m. for the special broadcast of oath-taking ceremony of the 46th President of USA. Remember, DD India has its massive presence in Washington, D.C. We're going to get you all that you want to see, you want to know as Joe Biden takes oath. And we also leave you with these visuals of Sanat.
Yes, send out India's tribute to the President-elect Joe Biden and the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Good night. Thanks very much for being with us. Namaskar.
Namaskar.